G'day buddies, I am Jacaro Toro, and on this channel I focus on Australian Aborigines, mostly on their languages so far. However, this is the second video in the Australia BB series, Australia Before the British. And today I thought we should talk about languages and genes, genetics. So when it comes to the language situation that existed when the British arrived in Australia, we have the so-called top end here, where there are lots of small languages that can be really different from each other. And they seem to belong to a number of small language families. And how that situation has come about, no one knows. Then, in the rest of the continent and up here, we find the Pama-Nyungan language family. And they are similar in some ways, and different in other ways. When it comes to case marking, there are similarities all over the continent. The differences are much bigger in the verbs. So there they have developed in different directions more clearly. And we linguists agree with each other that these languages cannot have been spoken in Australia for more than 4,000 or 5,000 years. Earlier, there are linguists who have been of the opinion that they spread from an area where they are most varied in north central Australia, somewhere around here. That's where they originated from and spread from. Well, how does this relate to genes? Well, as I said in the previous video, archaeologists have earlier been of the opinion that there have been two waves of immigration to the continent, because in the southeast they find in Aboriginal graves, both really old ones and more recent ones, skeletons with thin bones. But it is also possible in Australia to find Aboriginal graves in which the skeletons are much more robust. And such graves are all less than 20,000 years old. So based on how the bones look, archaeologists have been of the opinion that there must have been two waves of immigration. Well, in the beginning of this century, there were two DNA studies that were done. Red et al. In 2002 looked at Y chromosomes from Australian Aboriginal men in the northern and central parts of the country. They noted that around 50% of these men shared a particular Y chromosome variety, a variety of C, the haplogroup C, and that this variety is also present in the Indian subcontinent. And in their opinion, these two varieties, the Indian one and the Australian one, must have split a few thousand years ago. Ingman and Gyllensten, two countrymen of mine, in 2003, they looked at Australian mitochondrial DNA in the same part of Australia and found that it was diverse. But as it so happens, a lot has happened since 2003, of course. In 2011, Rasmussen et al., perhaps in English, published a study of the DNA of an Aboriginal man that lived in southern Western Australia around 100 years ago. A lock of hair had been preserved and they did a DNA analysis. Their conclusion, based on this man's genome alone, was that the Australian population split off from other Eurasians between 62,000 and 75,000 years ago. Yes, moving even closer to the present, in 2016, Bergström et al. Published a study where they looked at 13 Y chromosomes from Australian Aboriginal men. And what they found was that there was no evidence for recent gene flow from India. Instead, in their opinion, the time of divergence, when the Indian C variety and the Australian C variety diverged, had been greatly underestimated by Red et al. That was their opinion, based on new techniques for analyzing DNA. In 2016, Klein et al. Also published what they call the first extensive study of DNA of Australian Aborigines. They analyzed DNA from 83 Aborigines and also from 25 Papuans from Papua up there, and concluded that Papuan and Aboriginal peoples developed distinct markers around 58,000 years ago, and that their study points to a single migration. They also talk about a previously unidentified internal dispersal that swept across the continent and that spread languages, but did not leave a genetic trace. So the languages in question would be the Pama-Nyungan languages. And Eske Vilosliu at the University of Copenhagen, I believe he is, he said that this was very peculiar, that people spread across the continent and spread languages, but did not leave a genetic trace. His name is Vilosliu, by the way. Danish is my second language. As it so happens, I started to learn Danish when I was 2 years old, when me and my parents lived in southernmost Sweden, opposite Copenhagen. So anyway, 4,000 to 5,000 years ago, the dingo came to Australia. It was a domesticated dog, but it became feral in Australia. And we linguists feel we can say with quite big certainty that it is around that time that also the Pama-Nyungan languages spread. So then, why do geneticists only find traces of one wave of immigration? Well, I really don't know. I am not a geneticist myself. Can I just say, though, that the first extensive study of DNA from Australian Aborigines from 2016, I feel that that was quite small. Is it really an extensive study if you include DNA from 83 people? That's not very many, really, is it? Not in my opinion. Not if you want to call it an extensive study. This seems to be a bit of a mystery at present. What we do know from archaeology is that things changed drastically in Australia, in most of the continent, 4,000 to 5,000 years ago. Not only did the dingo come in, it is obvious in the archaeological material that the tools people used for food production changed. And cave paintings changed drastically too. And that is something that usually signals a change in religious views. So something drastic happened. It looks in the archaeological material as if a wave of immigration came in. But the question then is, of course, where are their genes? And I suppose this remains to be seen. Now, finally, where did the Pama-Nyungan languages come from? Well, in this study from 2016, they talk about a dispersal that swept from the northeast. Some linguists, as I said, have earlier thought that the Pama-Nyungan languages spread from an area here in the north central parts where they are most diverse. And now they talk about the spread from the northeast. Well, if we consider the dingo that came in at this time, it so happens that the dingo, genetic studies show that the dingo is a close relative of the New Guinea singing dog, also known as the New Guinea Highland dog. So New Guinea up here on the island of Papua. That gives us a clue, a very clear indication. Evidently, originally, the dingo and the New Guinea singing dog come from the Malay archipelago. That's what I read online. And where do we have the northernmost Pama-Nyungan language? The language that is considered the northernmost Pama-Nyungan language is this one, Kalalagauya, known by a number of other names, one of them being the Western Torres Strait language. The Torres Strait is the strait between Australia and Papua. There are a number of islands on which traditionally two different languages were spoken, the Western language and the Eastern language. And since the end of the 1800s, there is also a Creole language, Torres Strait Creole, also known as Broken, from Broken English. Anyway, this language is a little bit like English. So what is English like? English has a Germanic foundation that comes from Old English. But then during one period, they borrowed quite a number of words from Old Norse and got a lot of very common English words from Old Norse, like husband and window and knife and law. And then, of course, when the Norse period ended, in England, Latin, French, and other Romance words started to flood in. Kalalagauja is a little bit like that. You see, it has a Pama-Nyungan base, or core, but it also has two other layers. There is a Papuan layer, showing influence from the north, from Papua, and there is an Austronesian layer as well, but a Pama-Nyungan core. So I think we can quite safely say that these people that came with the Pama-Nyungan languages came from that direction, from the north. Where their genes are, as I said, that remains to be seen. This is all for today, so see you later.